afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Elizabeth Cantench, and I'm the Executive Director at the ACOS Alliance. Welcome to the ACOS Annual Safety Coordination Meeting. This session is the culmination of a series of meetings that we've brought together more than 100 ACOS signatories and freelancers to discuss safety issues and in particular, practical solutions. I have the pleasure to introduce you to our moderator today, David Rohde. He is Executive Editor for News at The New Yorker, ACOS co-founder and board member. Hi, David.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for that kind introduction. Elizabeth and I, as she said, work together with other, with freelancers and news editors and news organizations and international NGOs to create ACOS many years ago now. I'm incredibly proud of all that ACOS has achieved. And our goal today, and ACOS's goal in general, is to come up with practical solutions to increase safety for all journalists. But clearly, the journalists that are in the most danger are local journalists. And today, you're going to meet three of them who've done incredibly brave reporting in Myanmar, in Haiti, and in Afghanistan. It's an honor to meet them. I also want to thank the organizations that have helped New York Times, that have helped us today. The New York Times is sponsoring this specific conversation, but the organizations that have helped ACOS the most since its founding over many, many years are the Open Society Foundation, the MacArthur and Logan Foundations, and our partner, the Overseas Press Club Foundation throughout. They've been amazing and they make this work possible. And I just, again, want to talk, and we'll keep coming back to this. I want people to listen. We'll hear from these three amazing journalists. We'll hear their tips on practical solutions for how to increase safety for journalists, what editors can do better, what news organizations can do better, and what international journalists can do better to make journalism more safe. That's our goal here. I'll talk to each of them together for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions. So I want to introduce our first panelist. That's Min Thant. You can turn on your camera and everyone can see you. Is the features editor of Frontier Myanmar. Is a Burmese American journalist. Holds degrees in gender studies, anthropologies, and Asian studies. They won a Pulitzer Prize in 2019 as part of a Reuters team covering the Rohingya crisis and its aftermath in Myanmar. Thank you, for joining us. I'll now introduce our next panelist, Najiba Noori. Najiba, you can turn on your camera. Everybody, we're all going to just sort of, I'm going to fake this and pretend I know what I'm doing, but so Najiba has joined us. So Najiba is an Afghan photojournalist who's currently living in France. She fled Afghanistan this summer after the Taliban takeover. Najiba studied at Bamiyan University, and initially she worked for a French NGO in Afghanistan before taking photography courses and becoming a freelance photographer and a filmmaker. She joined Agence France Presse, AFP, as a video journalist in 2019, and then covered events and news in Afghanistan over the next 2 years. She fled Afghanistan, as I said, it was August 18th, 2021, and now lives in Paris. Our last panelist is Ralph Thomassaint Joseph. Ralph, you can turn on your camera, and I apologize if I mispronounced your middle name. Ralph is the director of publication for Ayibopost. Ralph started his journalism career as a radio reporter in Haiti in 2010, covering the aftermath of the terrible earthquake there. He co-created the news section of Ayibopost, which has become one of Haiti's most competitive digital news and media outlets, and he's currently Ayibopost's director of publication. He holds a master's degree in journalism from New York University, has received multiple awards for his reporting. He's also a member of the National Association of Black Journalists. He speaks 4 languages: French, Haitian, Creole, and English. Thank you, Ralph, for joining us. So thank you again. So I first want to, I will talk to each of you. I just want each of you to kind of just talk about the challenges you faced in, I'd say, the last year in terms of your reporting that you faced in general. And each country you've been in. There's going to be, just so the audience knows, we have I'm going to start with A, and as each person talks, we'll show some photographs or some of their work that they did. So so starting out with you, A, I wanted to talk about, the work you've done, but primarily the safety concerns you face and other colleagues face trying to report in Myanmar, given the sort of violent repression that's going on now across the country, against journalists and anyone opposing the current regime. So just 2-3 minutes, and we'll each talk. But anyway, you could just first talk about your experiences and your thoughts and your concerns.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Reporting in Myanmar has never been the safest thing in the world. There has been repression for decades. Things were getting better for the last 10 years or so, but ever since February and when the military in Myanmar staged a coup, there has been a sharp increase in the number of incidences related to journalists. And so right now, we've had over 100 journalists who have been arrested since the beginning of the coup, and around 50 of them still remain behind bars to this day. In my own publication, we've had one photojournalist who was shot through the hand as he was covering a protest, and he's still recovering from that as we speak. And another one of our colleagues, our editor, Danny Fenster, was imprisoned for months and was only very recently released after a court found him guilty and sentenced him for 11 years in prison. Luckily, he was released just a few days later, but you can sort of imagine the sort of roller coasters of emotions all of us went through in sort of bearing witness to that case. And we continue to have a contributor who is still in prison to this day. So, I think what we're seeing in Myanmar now is a targeting of the press. Obviously, nobody is really safe in the country as long as they do not support the junta. But we've seen dozens of journalists, including myself, who have left the country either for neighboring countries or further afield in order to be able to continue to do the work. And it's become incredibly difficult for people who are on the ground to report safely, and for those of us who are outside of the country to engage with those who remain in the country safely, not just in terms of people trying to publish, but also the ways in which we're actually able to contact sources, because in many cases there's internet blockages. And so, do you say not cover a massacre in a town, or do you, accept a level of risk that would be essentially forced upon the source who wants to send you a photo, but isn't able to do it over encrypted means? So there's a number of really challenging ethical questions that people in Myanmar and people reporting about Myanmar are having to grapple with now.
And I want to ask one quick follow-up question. Do you think the international community has done enough to pressure the regime there, or are they sort of ignoring the repression that's happening now? The US in particular.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of sort of condemnation of what's happening, especially from countries like the US. We see, very strongly worded letters, but historically, dictators don't tend to respond to strongly worded letters. And, countries like the US have done some work, right? We don't want to completely deny the fact that there has been some economic sanctions. There has been some certain sort of political pressure being used on Myanmar's neighbors who have far more influence into the country, especially big investors like Singapore, Japan. You see these sort of Western liberal democracies trying to exert pressures that way as well. But overall, there's been over 1,300 civilians, protesters who have been killed since the beginning of this year. Thousands of people are imprisoned. We have rising COVID deaths, a crashing economy, a depreciating currency, people are, even if the sort of direct violence isn't harming them necessarily in the day-to-day, the economic pressures is going to ensure that millions of people are going to slip back into poverty, and that's its own form of violence. And what we're not seeing at the international stage is a coordinated response in terms of an arms embargo, right? Like something very simple and relatively easy to do. Sanctions on military controlled conglomerates, right, that are trafficking in oil and energy and these sort of massive sectors that bring in tons of money. And yeah, so you see sort of a piecemeal approach by some countries that is still not going as far as they could be, and people aren't necessarily using every arsenal in the toolbox short of actual intervention, like physical intervention.
That's great. And I mean, it's a terrific summary and frustrating. And it's Singapore and Japan could do more in Europe. I don't mean to be U.S. centered on this. And again, folks, I want to start broadly. I just want everybody to hear about what's happening in these countries, the 1,300 deaths in Myanmar. But as we progress, we'll be focusing more on just journalist safety. Najiba, in terms of Afghanistan, I guess we can talk later. You can talk about how harrowing it was to get out of the country, the complete failure of the Afghan and American governments to, perform and protect all Afghans. But I was curious if you want to talk about what, there still are journalists working in Afghanistan. I think you're trying to help them get their stories out. What is it like for these journalists who are still there, and how hard is it for you? You're in France trying to help, and you were forced to flee for your life. So just if you could talk about journalism today under the Taliban.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Well, it's very, very tough for me, to first being into exile, and as a journalist, it's very, very tough to, to follow the news in my country and what's happening now to my people, especially to my colleagues, journalists. Since Taliban took power in Afghanistan, it's really getting worse for Afghan journalists, especially for female journalists. They're not able to go to work because Taliban, they don't allow them. But of course, there are like a few of them that they're working, but there are like many, many challenges that they can't, work freely. So if you could, you saw maybe in the news that there are many journalists that they were beaten during these women protests that were in Kabul. And still, the challenges is that for me, it's funny that now the foreigners, they could, easily work and freely work in Afghanistan and in the provinces, that it's like opposite, that Afghan journalists, they can't work anymore. And it's very funny that the other day, my foreigner friend, who is also a journalist, she was saying that she just came back from Afghanistan, and she was saying that for me, it was very challenging to have an Afghan journalist with me, during the covering the news, because the Taliban, they don't allow Afghan journalists to work. And it's become really like challenging, because at this time of, at this period of time in Afghanistan, it's very, very important that the stories, especially for women, to be told by Afghan journalists or Afghan women. So we are working. So I am based in Paris, and I am trying to help, especially female journalists who are still in Kabul, who are still working, but still it's challenging. But what I can do is just, to help them regarding their stories, which that they are working on them. And here I'm trying to find, the medias that they could publish these stories. And what we want, it's very concerning that journalism maybe could, disappear in Afghanistan if it's continue like this. And Afghan journalists, they want international community to help keep press freedom alive in Afghanistan. And now those journalists that they are in exile, this is, somehow our responsibility to work together and to keep this connection between, those journalists that is still there in Afghanistan, and to work together to tell these stories, and this is our, situation right now, but we are, still working together.
And do you think, just again, the same sort of quick follow-up, that the international community is doing enough? Is the US putting enough pressure on the Taliban to allow journalists, Afghan journalists, and I should have said this from the beginning, every international, or every, myself included, anyone who goes into a foreign country knows that you're only as good as the local journalist who works with you. So the foreign journalists don't really know what's going on. It's the Afghan journalists or the local journalists in Haiti or Myanmar who know the most. So it's an interesting strategy where it sounds like the Taliban are letting the foreigners wander around, but they're not allowed. The Afghan journalists who would know the most, are blocked. But again, is there more that the world can be saying to the Taliban about this?
Well, the worst thing is that now the Western, medias, I saw a few of foreigner journalists that they went in Afghanistan to cover, stories. They would take this selfie with this Taliban and, tweet it that, okay, now everything is okay in Afghanistan, especially in Kabul, and Taliban, they changed. So, this is really like, I don't know, it's, for me, I felt really bad, that how they could, tweet it, and how they could go and take a selfie with this group of terrorists that they have been killing my people since, 20 years. And already with former government, we were targeted, and I personally, as a journalist, we have lost many female journalists and male journalists, around the country and in provinces and Kabul, and still it's going on. There are many journalists that they were killed after Taliban took control of Afghanistan. I think for me, again, what we need is to support Afghan journalists. As I said, the stories of Afghanistan and Afghan people should be, told by our own people, by our own journalists. So I would say, but there are like this organization that they are, trying to evacuate those journalists that they are really in danger, to evacuate them. We appreciate it, but there are like journalists that they don't want to leave the country. They want to continue working there. So, and I think we must, if we don't, if we don't see the difference. So I think those journalists that they went to Afghanistan, maybe they didn't go before the Taliban coming in Afghanistan, and they can see, the difference that what we have achieved was not easy, especially for women during these 20 years. And what you write as a Western journalist to say that, okay, everything is okay, this is not fair. And now you could see, like, Afghan people, they're facing this hunger crisis, and they're really struggling to feed their families. And if we talk about the journalism, if we don't, if we don't do anything, so as I said, maybe the journalism could disappear from Afghanistan.
Yeah, no, it's a terrible time. Ralph, sorry about that. Ralph, I want to shift now to Haiti, which arguably receives the least attention of these three countries. That's gone on for decades. tremendous danger. Also, I know the editor-in-chief of your organization recently had to flee the country. So again, can you just talk about how Haitian journalists are reporting? You're based in New York. Does that help you being based in New York? Does it let you somehow protect you and allow you to post more things and face less danger, or does it not help? But if you can just talk about current reporting in Haiti and the dangers that you all face.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thank you to ECOS Alliance for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be with you today, guys. Well, I've been reporting since 2010, so it's been 11 years now. I'm working as a reporter. I started in a very difficult situation, reporting after the earthquake in Haiti that killed over 10,000 people. So doing journalism in Haiti, I often say it like that. It's like, especially when you're Haitian, it's like you're reporting on a war zone when the bombs are killing your own family, your own people. So first of all, it's mentally exhausting. It's not an easy job at all because the last 40, 50 years, Haiti has collapsed into the country has plunged into an institutional dysfunction where currently the gangs make the law. And maybe you've heard recently our functioning president was killed in his house, while any of his guards were wounded or killed. So this is a complete chaos in a country where the justice system is dysfunctional. We have many journalists who have been killed the last 4 years, for example, and so far there is no justice. So doing journalism, of course, there are many journalists because in a country where corruption prevails, the press is also part of the corruption. The press is a tool to back that system. But to do good journalism, that's where it hurts political leaders, it hurts business people. And at Ayibopost, we are that kind of platform that promotes a culture of transparency. We have published many things during the last protest against corruption, where people were massively on the streets, especially young people. They use internet, and our platform was considered the media that was, providing the information about, how billions of dollars have been spent with no record, and we felt that we were under threat until recently. We had, many activists, lawyers, and journalists who were killed with no justice. And you mentioned our current editor-in-chief. He left the country because he was kidnapped in front of our news building. And fortunately, he was released, but his car was stolen with all his IDs. And he found his car, and the car was, driven by a military officer, and the justice released that person. And our current editor-in-chief feel, okay, the necessity to leave the country for a while just to see how things are going on currently. So, like in many other places, like in Afghanistan or in Myanmar, doing journalism in Haiti, especially when you're trying to hold people in power into account, it's not easy at all. There are threats, especially in a country where the justice system is totally collapsed.
And I just want to, again, the same quick follow-up. I don't want to be too US centric. Europe barely, we were talking before the meeting about how Europe barely covers Haiti, but specifically, Ralph, do you think the Biden administration is doing enough? The US is the most powerful, neighbor to try to improve the situation in Haiti, or ignoring it?
The thing is, David, the reality is the US make decisions in Haiti. For historic reasons, the United States interests were not aligned with Haitians. because Haiti is the first Black republic in the world, and Haiti is the first country that questioned slavery. So Haiti had to fit the narrative that Black people cannot govern themselves and Black people are unfit for civilization. So historically, the U.S. has worked to make Haiti poor, more unstable. So we've seen the most brutal dictatorship, the most corrupted government were backed by many U.S. administration until recently. So even the President Jovenel Moise, who was killed, he remained on power unconstitutionally, but he was backed by the U.S. government. And when people were on the streets asking for transparency, denouncing corruption, the U.S. were, the U.S. administration was not really with these people in the streets since, the money people were, questioning was from, a loan from Venezuela. So it's a bit hard to answer your question. Yeah, of course, we know that, as journalists, as Haitian, that, the U.S. interests are not aligned with Haitians, especially when it comes to, governance. So we know that historically, that the U.S. has worked to weaken Haiti for historical reason, because, I always say that as long as the U.S. cannot address its racism internally, its diplomacy will always be racist. So I think that historically, racism played a key role in the way that the U.S. defined its, foreign policy with Haiti. So when it comes to have, the best political leaders, when it comes to fight corruption, when it comes to protect freedom, we have seen on the ground there are some, initiatives backed by, U.S. fund, by the USAID. But in reality, the country has fallen into a state of chaos where currently U.S. guns are killing hundreds of people every year, and there is any follow, there is any, it's just words, it's just, discourse, but there is not any real intervention to keep people from, dying or even help them find justice.
No, you're absolutely right in that, yes, Haiti was the scene of the first successful slave uprising, that was a deep threat to the United States at that time. And you're absolutely right about the horrible U.S. policy since then. And now I'm gonna switch back, and you're up next. But and again, we'll shift to questions at about in a little bit, in about 20 minutes. But I just wanted to do kind of couple more rounds of questions to each of you. Ralph talked about the internet, and I wanted to ask you, your publication has a sort of, it's sort of the positive things about the internet, that it allows maybe you have some people in the country, some people outside the country, and how does that work? I was going to ask this question earlier, but you already pointed out that there's blockages sometimes. But are there positive things about the technological changes that have happened that let you get information out and then maybe edit it and produce it from other countries?
Absolutely, yes. And this is one of the main advantages of internet. We were able to develop that, different media and ecosystem thanks to internet, because we were able to use the tools at our disposals, become with a very new digital platform where we use explanatory contents in the Haitian context to explain to people in Creole what's going on, especially when it comes to corruption. So yes, internet played the key role, and internet was very essential during the last protest, the last 4 years, because the young people, they took the streets, they didn't use the traditional media. As I had mentioned that, mainly are part of, the big corruption system. So internet plays a key role. And thanks to internet, we are able to reach a broader audience, especially, locally and internationally. And people can share our content to digital platform, to social media like WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So thanks to internet, for example, I've been here in New York for over 1 year. I was able, for example, to produce an explanatory content before the president was assassinated to explain to people why he remains in power and why he wanted to organize the elections. And I could do that because, you know, thanks to the new technology, I was able to be in a room here in New York to produce all the contents from filming to editing. And I was able to publish that on the internet without the fear, first of all, I'm outside of Haiti. I could publish such content because it heard the power profoundly. And we could do that because we knew that after publishing such a content, we could leave our office and still be able to publish because all of us, we could work remotely and still, producing good contents. And this is something that happened after, before the president was killed, they killed a famous woman activist with a journalist. So after this assassination, we had in mind that if there is a list circulating, our platform must be in that list. So we leave our office for a couple of days, but we were still able to publish on our platforms because, physical presence is not necessary many times when it comes to digital platform.
That's great. And I want to stay on a positive note there. Has that worked for you? Do you find that the web gives you more freedom to print things? And then on the flip side, I mean, there was recently a campaign criticizing you, personally online for a story that ran. You wrote a rebuttal to it online, but I just wanted you to talk about the advantages and disadvantages that the web gives us.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, especially in Myanmar's case, the advent of the internet has completely changed the way in which people have been able to report. A silver lining, I suppose, is that in Myanmar, you can sort of see a case study of what reporting looked like pre-internet and post-internet in the aftermath of a coup, right? This is Myanmar's third coup. And so after the uprising in 1988, when journalists were trying to get information out of the country in the 90s and early 2000s, people were having to try to get access to diplomatic pouches. There were people literally sneaking out rolls of film, inside of them, trying to sort of access like land borders and trying to sneak out that way. And so information was quite locked down and the country was quite isolated, and it was really difficult to get an even halfway decent, accurate view of what was happening in Myanmar because of how strict the censorship was of people and sort of how controlled information going out of the country was, as well as people coming into the country. And in the case of this year, as the coup was taking place that first morning, the junta actually tried to shut down the internet for the country. And so, all of us were having difficulty getting online. A lot of things were blocked. And yet, it wasn't a sort of complete shutdown. Wired connections stayed online. And we actually have live footage from that morning of tanks rolling into the Capitol because a Zumba instructor was teaching a class there, and she somehow was connected to the internet still. When reporters were, frantically trying to figure out what was happening, you could just watch live on Facebook that this coup was happening. And so I think one huge difference that the internet has made is that the average citizen is that much more able to communicate what's happening and that much more able to get information to journalists, and journalists are that much more able to sort of connect with one another, as well as people who are not in the places where they're physically located. And in terms of people on my team, we have people both inside the country and outside the country. And so, without the internet, we wouldn't be able to do the level of reporting that we're able to do, nor really communicate with one another in a way that keeps people safe, right? Like landlines can be tapped, and people can be found much more easily. And so with the internet, with good digital security, consistent digital security, we're able to keep people much more safe. And one really important strategy that people are using is to essentially not keep things locally, right? Like in many places around the world, the main worry is that your accounts will be compromised. In Myanmar, you also have to worry about just the physical device itself, or at least worry that much more about the device itself. And so, you essentially leave your house with a really silly looking like blank phone, right? Nothing is logged in. You don't have apps downloaded. You keep the device with you, but you kind of re-download everything, re-log into everything only when you're using it, and you log back out again. And there's been a lot of support actually from around the world, especially journalist support organizations in helping people improve their digital security. Although obviously with so many people in jail and so many new citizen journalists coming up, and a new generation of people sort of newly initiated by fire into the field, it's not enough, but people are actively trying. And then I suppose on the flip side of what's happening, the internet does make all of us journalists that much more accessible. And we've seen, not just in Myanmar, not just with me, but I think the Philippines is a really famous case of journalists who are reporting critically of figures and organizations that are sort of really well supported by the general public, or at least a very loud contingent of the general public, who are basically doubly punished should they try to publish things that are more critical, right? Not only do you worry about sort of either state intervention or sort of like more institutional level censure, you also have the general public who may be sort of piling onto that. And I think in many cases you see people dealing with not just damage to their emotional health, but also actual threats. I've definitely had threats to me and my family as well. And I think in Myanmar right now, what's also happening is one of the ways in which people are trying to take direct action against the junta is to do what they're calling social punishment, which is to find people who they see as being related to the military in some way. So perhaps this is the wife of a police sergeant, or the child of a military general, or the owner of a company that allies itself with the military, and they will find those people and harass them online, perhaps go as far as to actually physically harm them, but mostly it stays at the sort of social level, right? Of like ostracization, boycotting their businesses, kind of, harassing their children or their family members. And yeah, I mean, it can be quite scary, but I think overall, the internet has generally done more harm than good, at least in terms of the reporting on the coup.
Thank you. And I think, we all should have our work questioned. That's fine. I've had my work questioned. It's just when you get online threats like you've experienced yourself and your family, that's the negative side of the internet. I want to encourage people in the audience, they can start submitting questions in the chat, the Q&A part of the chat. And I'm going to do sort of one last quick focused round of questions. And Najiba, this will be coming to you. I want to know what specifically, this is back to ACOS and our goal to, a culture of safety alliance. How do we create a culture of safety? So I'll ask each of you, but Najiba next, like, what can international news organizations and, international journalism, NGOs, and even individual foreign journalists, do better now to help local journalists in Afghanistan? Are there certain practices? I mean, should it be evacuating journalists? Should it be, continuing to send journalists so the Taliban know they're being watched? What can NGOs do also, and even foreign journalists who come in Afghanistan, the way they behave? You mentioned not taking selfies with the Taliban. That's a great example. But if there's specific ideas you have for what groups and individuals can do to help Afghan journalists still in the country.
Well, I think the international organizations, especially those ones that they support journalism, they must provide this. So now we are talking about those journalists that they're still in Afghanistan and they're working there, and those ones that they're like me, fled the country after Taliban took control in Afghanistan. I think, as I said, international community, they should help keep press freedom alive in Afghanistan. So, and they should support journalists, especially Afghan journalists, and they must, the women journalists must be able to go back to work. There are many journalists, including friends of mine, they're still living in fear in their homes, and they want to, leave the country. So those ones that are really in danger, I think the organizations like here, RSF or RSF, they have been evacuating journalists from Afghanistan. They did, and they are doing it. I think about the evacuation, they should continue this. But for those ones that are still in Afghanistan, they should, make sure that they continue their work and medias. So it's very important in this historic time, and of course chaotic, that Afghan journalists work together here, out of the country, and inside the country. So, and also they must provide more opportunities for people, instead of the journalists they go to from here outside of country to go there. They should give these opportunities to the Afghan journalists, because there are many medias that they stopped their work, they don't work, and many journalists they become jobless. I know a few of journalists, they start another small business, such as shopkeepers. They become shopkeepers, and even in the streets they start working there, because otherwise they don't have how they could feed their families. So, and I think they also the international community must provide more opportunities for Afghan women who are still outside of Afghanistan, to tell their stories, their own stories by themselves. And I think the journalists that they were able to come out of the country. It was a big shock for everybody, for us, and I think the trauma treatment, should be given to these journalists, and opportunities to remain, that these journalists to remain in their fields of work, because it's very difficult to come in a country, and to be an exile. But we are trying, to keep working together. For me, that I used to work, to tell these stories, beside the breaking news, that was happening. I used to cover the news, you know. I used to tell these feature stories, used to traveling to different provinces, and I was happy. I said to many of these people that I had a life there. You know, it was in my country there was a war, but still I was happy, you know, and I was working and I was fighting, but for my rights. And again, the other women that they have achieved many things, you know, during these 20 years, and you know, 2 years back when US started a peace, you know, negotiation with Taliban, it was, for me, I think it was not right that US started this negotiation. And before, I mean, when it started, we were trying to make stories and interviewing, especially women, that what do you feel, you know, if the Taliban comes? I would never, you know, imagine the Taliban took Afghanistan like this very easily. And we were asking these questions that, what do you think if the Taliban comes, what will happen? You know, they will clearly say that, of course, what we have achieved during these years, it will be, you know, gone very easily. And in the matter of hours, it really happened.
Well, what you're talking about, frankly, is trauma. I'm taking notes because I want to summarize the recommendations at the end. But you know, I was working and I was fighting for my rights, and it's just for all journalists, but particularly local journalists, the kind of emotional and psychological stress that people go under is real, and it's important that organizations support, you know, journalists, but also that we all talk to each other about, you know, how much we love this work, but how heartbreaking it can be when it's, you know, when you can't do that work anymore. And anyway, I understand your, thank you for talking about it so personally. Ralph, I wanted to switch to you again, in terms of the specific idea of what international organization can do, or international journalists. So the Post, you work with AP, and I wanted to hear about how that, does that help you? How does that partnership work? Is that sort of maybe a model for, you know, local journalists in countries that, you know, face the kind of security threats and political threats Haitian journalists face? You know, how has that gone with AP?
Yeah, well, you know, the international journalists are our best allies so far, and this is part of our strategies because one of the things that we have realized that, you know, we are a young platform made of young people. You know, some of us have studied abroad here in the U.S. and go back to Haiti to launch that platform, and we realize that because our media is considered as an anti-system media, because we're revealing many things that were not, you know, in discussion in the country, we say the best way to protect ourselves is to engage alliance with foreign journalists. That's the reason why, if you go to our platform, you will see there are a couple of collaboration with foreign journalists, because we know that if something happened to one of us, if there's a direct threat to our platform, for example, we have been hacked many times after some important publication, we receive, you know, online threats. We know that if something happened to us, maybe, you know, digitally or physically, we have some friends outside of Haiti who can echo our problem. And in countries like Haiti, when the problem goes internationally, it makes political leader consider it seriously, because it's kind of, you know, it harm their image, the good image they want to project internationally. So that's the reason why I say that, you know, foreign journalists are our best allies so far. And Ayibopost have collaborated with some organizations, some institution, but not really with institution working and protecting journalists. And this is something that we are very open to, you know, for this kind of collaboration, you know, especially considering what happened in the country the last 4 years until the president was assassinated and he cannot find justice. And the way things are going, we know that he will not find justice. So yes, our best ally is foreign journalists, and of course, we know that when we partner with foreign organization, with foreign institution like ICOS, for example, it's in our benefit to do so because it can echo our problem and help us address this issue efficiently.
That's great. Again, it's another positive thing here that partnerships do help. When you internationalize issues, local leaders listen to it. That's great to hear. And quickly, just quit any, what can international news organizations, do better? I think you have concerns about sort of parachute journalism, but any concrete ideas of what international organizations can do to help journalists in Myanmar, local journalists?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially in the crisis situation, I'm a big advocate of just throwing money at the problem. A lot of us, especially if you're a freelancer, right, you're used to working really on the knife's edge of financial feasibility. And, a piece getting paid within a few days versus a month could be the difference between can you afford a VPN or not. And that's the difference between maybe going to jail or not. And obviously some outlets are good about increasing pay due to the hazardous situation. But I was freelancing at the beginning of the coup, and there were some pieces I got paid 60 days after I submitted the actual piece. There were organizations who really wanted free content from me, who repeatedly used my photos and videos, and basically stopped talking to me when I asked if there was money. And yeah, I mean, I think given all the safety issues, given that the value of the Myanmar jet has decreased by half since the beginning of the coup. In these sort of extremely volatile situations, having a few extra dollars in your accounts, in your hands, can really make or break a situation. Whether that is, money that's being used to secure a safe house or pay a bribe to get out of prison, it can really, really make that difference. And so, obviously, every outlet has its own sort of pay schedule and format, but I really, really advocate that if you're going to be commissioning work from people in crisis situations, that you also have like a crisis manual in how you sort of approach the payment issue.
That's great and very concrete. I throw money at the problem is true, particularly in such dangerous situations. So I want to go to questions here. The first one for Najiba, it's from Leon Williams. Can you talk about, there's been reports of journalists being killed since the Taliban took over, but the information's kind of fuzzy. So I just don't know if you have any sense of how many journalists have been killed or imprisoned since then, or do we not know? And are the Taliban maybe successfully covering it up?
Well, since Taliban took power in Afghanistan, there were like many journalists that they were beaten, and they were jailed by the Taliban and badly beaten. And they were like, I know that 2 journalists, they were killed. One that he was working for a local media, and the other one was working with Deutsche Welle. They were killed, and of course still it's very, very difficult to get information from Afghanistan, and I'm sure there are many things going on in the provinces that we can't get this information, because there are not many journalists that they work in the provinces. So mostly there are journalists working in Kabul, and it's still for me it's difficult, but still it's this violence against journalists, it's going on, because as I said, it's really funny that Afghan journalists, they can't travel to the provinces, but foreigners, they can freely, easily go to the provinces and make reports. So with some of these foreigner journalists, I'm not happy the way that they make reports, because they can't, the way that we make reports, they can't, because some of them, they don't know, the Afghanistan, they don't know like the people, and they don't go deeply, to the stories. So yeah, so this is like the situation for now.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, there are these local journalists that they can't, they can't work, and the only choice is just to come out of the country. There are many journalists, they fled to the third country like Pakistan, Iran, and they are, just staying there without any, future. So, but those ones that they were evacuated by other, like Europe countries, they are maybe okay. But those ones that they fled the country by themselves, for those ones, it's very, very challenging, to continue their lives in Pakistan.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's a terrible situation. I have a question from Liz Gray. This is for A and Ralph. It's Liz says she's not new to risk management. Liz Gray is saying, the person asking the question, but is new to risk management in terms of journalist safety. And she says, so I hope this question isn't too naive. So both of you have talked about news coverage of issues in your countries, in Myanmar and Haiti, fading from the global sort of headlines, as if the world gets bored with what's happening. So do you think that it makes sense for journalists in those countries to take even more risks to get news stories that will bring global attention to their country? I guess first, Ralph, should Haitian journalists be taking more risks? And will it make a difference if they break a big story?
Yeah, media is a political tool. It's not just, you report information and just doing beautiful things. And from my own experience, the more you grow in journalism, the more you feel the need to, to make some, important reporting pieces. So this is from my personal experience. So I know that it's important because when we have activists on the streets, most of the time, we journalists, we need that change too. This is the case of my country. For example, uh, I mentioned the last 40, 50 years, Haiti has sunken into a deep poverty, a total collapse of government. But as a Haitian citizen, I need change. So when I'm doing journalism, I'm not just doing journalism to report about the beauty of Haiti. I'm reporting especially um, for any institution, local and international organization, political leaders, to try to use my work to make something happen in my country. So for me, it's impossible. You will not find in any place on earth, even when you have the most oppressive regime, you will always find people who fight in you. You will always find, these people sometimes they are not professional journalists, but they turn themselves, sometimes historians, sometimes writers, they turn themselves into provider of truth, provider of information. So, you know, cases may worsen in Afghanistan, in Haiti, and many other countries, but you will always find people like us to report. And I think it's important to keep reporting about things, especially to hold people in power to account. And despite the threats, there are many ways. For example, I think that in my situation in New York, I'm covered some way for sometimes, and I profit of my position here in New York to talk about things that it will be a bit difficult, it will be a bit tricky to talk about in Haiti. There is something I did before I left the country. In Haiti, rich people, the wealthiest people, they hold position of consular officer, representative for of many foreign country. So they hold their offices in the same places where they have their businesses. And this is something that, sometimes people see because they benefit from immunity. The police cannot stop their cars, and the justice cannot go into their business because of that consular officer position. They have some kind of immunity. So before I left Haiti, because I knew that I was about to leave the country, I covered that topic and I reported the names. I give the addresses because I think this is something for people to pay attention, since the business sector in Haiti is involved in many wrongdoings and drug trafficking and corruption and many other things. So there will be always a way out to do our jobs. And sometimes I recognize, even in Haiti, my life is under threat because I report things that make powerful people unhappy. But I feel the need to do that because I feel sometimes, you know, people can die when it comes to truth because, it's important. This is something impossible, even, on the hardest place on earth with the most corrupted government. You will always find a group of people who make truth pouring out.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Why we all do this, but it's the situation in for local journalists in some country in these countries is obviously more extreme. And then, hey, I guess that same question. I mean, is there a you have a junta there that's, as you mentioned, killed 1,300 civilians that were peacefully protesting. Is there an argument that a local journalist in that kind of situation should maybe, report less for a period, sort of play a long game where you keep a low profile, and or is that giving in? I don't know, what you think in terms of maybe you lay low for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to make any judgments on the different strategies that people are using, but I think I can sort of outline the way different outlets and individuals have kind of approached these things. So I think one thing some people are definitely doing is laying low. So there is a local news agency in Mon State. It's a relatively small state, relatively unknown to the outside world, who have essentially decided not to report on um, politics. They've decided to keep their focus on the economy, on sort of natural disasters and sort of things that people do need to know, right? Information that people do need to know in order to try and make decisions about their daily lives that are unrelated to the junta. And they, in taking that strategy, they've been able to, one, stay out of jail, but also keep their publishing license. And in that way, they've decided that this is a way that they can serve the public. Other outlets have taken completely different routes. Some have sort of gone underground for a little bit, and said, we're our organization doesn't no longer exist. Everyone's been fired, no one's reporting. And then, 2 months later, they pop up fully formed in a second country and are publishing extremely sort of critical and scathing pieces, really deep investigative pieces of what's happening in the country. And, in those 2 months, you didn't know, right, exactly if that was their plan or they were just sort of folding. Some journalists have essentially decided to forego the any sense of authority or reliability that they have built over the years, and are now publishing entirely under pseudonyms, often non-Burmese names. And that sort of, adds this layer of complication of, who is actually, still a local journalist, like who's reporting on Myanmar. So yeah, I think, people are making risk assessments in terms of what they think is best for them, and sort of what role they think they can best serve the public in. And so, yeah, I mean, I think at least in the Myanmar case, journalists are probably a bit more jaded in terms of how much the international community actually cares enough to take action, right? Like the world believed, and so do I, to be very clear, that there was a genocide being committed just a few years ago, and very little happened in terms of international intervention. And this is so much more complicated, at least from the sort of international perspective. And so, I don't necessarily think people are writing and sort of increasing their risk in order to capture global attention. I think the risks that people are taking are very much calibrated towards what serves the readers in Myanmar, the sort of general public in Myanmar, and more regional readers.
That's terrific. These are great practical things. And we have one last question, and this is for Najiba. It's from Mohammed Komani. He pointed out that 2 days ago, the Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalists, they announced 10 possible winners, a shortlist for their award. 5 of the 10 journalists that the Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalists are considering for awards publish their names anonymously. Najiba, I don't know, from Afghanistan, is there any kind of lessons or advice about after a reporter or local reporter publishes a story, any safety steps they can take? Do they go quiet online, move to a different apartment? Any practical ideas for after you publish something explosive and you're going to face retaliation?
Already there are these journalists that they're just changing, their places. Those are still, in the country. And of course, even now that I'm, like speaking to those female journalists that are still in Afghanistan. So we are talking and we were just discussing about this, that how, we could, I don't know, when a photo story or a report publish here, what should we do that, to not recognize, this journalist. And we are just saying, okay, so the only thing is that we should not put the names, so we should not mention the names, but still we want to work together. We want to find these medias that they are, interested about, stories in Afghanistan, especially about women. So for now, the only thing is just, to not mention the name, because Kabul, Afghanistan, it's a country that the Taliban are now in the power and they can easily find, and they are actually searching people, and they have been killed, many artists, musicians, and activists since they came. So of course they don't say, by themselves, but it's obviously it's them that they did this. So yeah, the only solution for us for now at this moment is this, that just reporting, but not to mention the names. I know it's very difficult and not good, but yeah.
Look, no, Najiba, you're right. And then, I just want to wrap up. All three of you, your bravery, intelligence, innovativeness, the web, which we said has some shortcomings. All of these things makes journalism possible. There hasn't been a total blackout in news from Haiti, Myanmar, or Afghanistan. It's obviously very, very mixed. And I just want to quickly talk about some of the specific concrete things that each talked about. Najiba talked about again the international, and again I'm talking about the international countries, international news organizations, international journalists, like pressure local officials. This is in Afghanistan, but everywhere, to allow local journalists to do reporting, because they will learn the most. In Afghanistan, female journalists in particular, news organizations evacuate journalists who are facing danger. That happened a lot in Afghanistan. I'm proud of the work journalist organizations did getting people out of there. focus on trauma, the trauma we all feel, talking to each other, talk to each other. News organizations should be helping reporters with trauma. Ralph talked about the success and importance of partnerships with international news organizations, and that the best way for local journalists to protect themselves is to do that kind of collaboration. And if one platform gets hacked, if you've got an international partner, you can post your story someone else. And that when a story does go internationally, it leads leaders in Haiti to care about it. A said that, I say this to news organizations, I'm an evil editor myself, but throw money at the problem, i.e. pay people quickly when they're in crisis situations, pay them in dollars, that enough money can make the difference between affording a VPN or not affording a VPN. It can make a huge difference for people to have like safe houses, apartments to go to. And it can prevent people from going to prison. People can lay low for a while. She talked about one organization that's only writing about politics, another organization disappearing and then reappearing 2 months later and publishing even more. And lastly, Ralph, and this is just sort of what he was saying, and just things that really move me. You will always find people to fight. They turn themselves into producers of truth. He talked about keeping reporting, that there's something inside of him that wants him to keep reporting, and as a Haitian citizen, to keep I keep reporting things that make powerful people unhappy, Ralph said, but I need to do that. And I think all journalists need to do that. I think all international news organizations and international journalism NGOs need to support that. So I thank you three, most of all, Najiba and Ralph, for joining me today and for all your heroic work. I think the New York Times for sponsoring this, and the various organizations that have helped ACOS continue to do its work. And again, the lesson here is that great journalism is happening, brave journalism is happening, and if we can work together, we can empower local journalists to speak truth to power, which is what we all believe in as journalists. Thank you all for joining me today. It's just been an honor to talk with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.